Hello, welcome to Hot Topics from the Amateur Rugby Podcast, recording via Facebook Live on Wednesday, 22nd of November, 2020. And we are going to get straight into the show today. So, mystery guest, would you please reveal yourself?
Hello.
There he is. This is Chris Morgan.
Yeah, apologies about the Movember. It's pretty horrible, I know. I'm not an American trucker, but I'm currently director of sport at Tunbridge School. And in terms of my rugby journey, it started in South Wales, playing for a club called Gysinnon. And in more recent years, went to university, Brunel University, Borough Road, which had a great rugby history, and then after that played for the Metropolitan Police and latterly Old Reigatians RFC.
Wonderful. Very varied experience you sound like you have.
Yeah.
Now, we got in contact via Twitter, basically, and it was the subject of the tweet that we both kind of commented on was one by Sean O'Brien, the Irish flanker, and he was just questioning whether we've lost touch with the grassroots of the game. So I'm just going to read that quote out, and it's from his new book, and then we can get into it from there. So Sean said, "I've often asked why professional players aren't allowed to go back and play with their clubs. All Blacks players are allowed to do this when coming back from injury. I think that's the missing part in the Irish rugby pyramid. We're losing touch with the grassroots of our game. You can imagine the crowd that might turn out for a game if Johnny Sexton went back to play for St Mary's or I played for Tollo. Opposing lads would love to play against us too." So I guess the first question, Chris, is why do we think that doesn't happen in the UK when it does in various other places around the world?
I suppose, Tim, without knowing the sort of nuances of contracts, but I suspect there's something about, who players' rights and who owns the contracts of the players. But I think from my understanding of the sort of seasons in the Southern Hemisphere, they're much more compartmentalized. Whereas I think there's, our seasons kind of overlap each other. The European Cup overlaps the sort of the Pro 14 and the Guinness Premiership. Everything sort of overlaps each other. So I can't imagine there would be any space in the calendar to facilitate that over here. Where I think in New Zealand, you've got the Mitre Cup and the Ranfurly Shield, or they don't run at the same time. So I think there's more opportunity for the players. And it's interesting in that Sean O'Brien comment, he spoke about how great it would be for the clubs and the communities, but how great would it be for the players themselves to go back and play for their clubs, sort of low stakes rugby. And I think it's probably a real challenge for lots of professionals that, it feels like a job. But for them, I would imagine that would be such a great experience.
It would. And I think we're getting to the time now where the type of players who sort of really remember the old school days are starting to disappear a little bit. So I'm just wondering whether players that are coming through now, whether they would have that same feeling or not, or whether they're completely removed from that kind of thing already.
I think with the constant sort of obsession with streamlining talent and stretch and extend, I think players get taken away from their sort of junior clubs at a very early stage as well. I think it's, there's an obsession about players playing above their level and being stretched and being challenged. But I think players learn a lot about themselves playing at a level where you can dominate and where you can express yourselves a little bit. But I think, certainly, I think if you're a young, talented player in Wales, I think you get taken away from your junior clubs very, very early. So I'm not even sure you would develop that affinity, that connection with your local club anyway. And I think that's a sort of real weakness of the game at the moment, because then, not every player is going to make it. Not every player is going to become a professional. And if you haven't developed that connection and that affinity with your junior club, and it doesn't work out and you don't end up being a professional rugby player, I wonder whether those players are then lost to the game for good.
Let's just go back quickly to actually that experience, what that would be for a top level player to go and play for their junior club. For like the example that Sean O'Brien gave was New Zealand, and Dan Carter did it before the Super Rugby tournament this year. And obviously, I think what Sean says is right. It'd be great for all the club players that get to play against these heroes, But I think, like you say, the reverse is true as well. There was one thing that somebody said on Twitter that didn't sort of prick my ears up though, which is that they might get targeted, and somebody be a bit of a worry. Do you see that as a potential issue?
I think these clubs invest a lot of money in these players, and they pay some great salaries. Yeah, I think they would be very very reluctant to release their players. I think pro clubs. I've heard about pro rugby players who are really keen cricketers not being allowed to play cricket in the summer. So yeah, I think the chances of them letting them play sort of club rugby are probably pretty low in the current structure, sadly.
Yeah, it is sad because yeah, I just think it would be a good thing if that could still happen. But I think you're right. I think it's a legal thing, and I think you're right that it's the amount of space that we have in the calendar here in the Northern Hemisphere, and that's, I guess, the next question: are we playing too many games? And I mean that at every level, the top level and all the way down the rungs. I think we're playing too much rugby lower down the league structure too.
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? I think you look at junior clubs, and they have thriving juniors and mini sections. That doesn't seem to be translating into sort of an increase in numbers at senior level. So, I'm sure there's a myriad of issues for that, but I think we've got to sort of ask the question: what's going wrong, and why aren't we seeing those senior numbers increase? Is the season too long? Are we playing the game in the wrong time of the year? Should the game be adapted to suit club level? I know, I think that's a real danger coaching juniors when you try to coach the game like you see at the pro level, and you might have a little sort of youngster who watches defenders in the pro game, and it's all offensive tackling. And if you coach him to offensive tackle and he weighs about 5 stone, then he's probably going to get hurt. So there's clearly a myriad of issues that is meaning that those thriving juniors and mini sections, we're not seeing that translate into the senior game. I think the RFU did a big study on this sort of quite recently and engaged players. But I think there's lots of issues, and I do think that if clubs were really connected to their communities, I think we'd see probably playing numbers increase. I think the pyramid has got a lot to answer for. And Michael Aylwin got a really good book, The Unholy Union, I think it's called, where he speaks about it. But I mean, lower league grassroots clubs, paying players some pretty healthy fees, which is great for the players, and I wouldn't begrudge anybody trying to earn a few quid extra. But again, if those players aren't fully embedded in the communities, then I think that there's a bit of a disconnect with the club and the communities which they operate in.
Yeah, for sure. I completely agree. And just to give a bit of balance on the whole New Zealand thing, I actually saw a tweet just before we started recording, which I'm just going to read now as well. I'm from somebody in New Zealand in the Waikato area. And he says, it's a guy called Steve Hale, and he says, either I'm getting old or the team's marketing departments are ineffective. I definitely knew every single Waikato A, B and under 21 rep when they were born and bred local from our club competition. Now they are contracted from all over New Zealand, and it's hard to keep up with the signings. No affinity. So, I think we're sometimes guilty of just glorifying the New Zealand game above and beyond what it actually deserves. And there's an example where they feel like they're losing touch with their players as well. Yeah.
I mean, the Guinness Premiership is, for all intents and purposes, there's an element of a sort of franchise system, isn't there? We got Wasps, playing in Coventry, and I think it's really interesting, isn't it? I think Exeter's success seems to me really built on the fact that there is a real connection with the community there. I mean, it feels to me like a real community club. They've got great links with the university. they are, for all intents and purposes, they're a bit of a region, really, aren't they, in a club system, and they really do connect with the wider community. And it's no coincidence, surely, that they've been so successful in recent times, and haven't got the sort of financial resources of some of the bigger clubs.
Yeah, it's funny how the game goes through cycles. There was a time when it felt like all you needed was a lot of money and a big backer, just for the success, and that worked for some clubs for a period of time. But I think it's going full circle now, and it's getting to a bit of where the traditions are more important again, which I think is a good thing.
Yeah, and I think some really successful coaches kind of tap into that. Scott Robertson, he kind of taps into that sort of amateur ethos, doesn't he? The camaraderie and the real team spirit. And I think you look at him and his coaching, it seems like a really incredibly fun environment. And those are amateur values. I mean, amateur can have sort of positive and negative connotations, can't it? I mean, in a truly positive way. Those amateur values, he clearly instills them in his environments that he creates, and he's seen great rewards, and who knows, he might be the next Welsh coach.
Yes, he might be. You never know. Just going back to something you said a minute ago about coaching an under 15-year-old to make dominant tackles, and that being an example of where like the youth game is separate from the professional game. Now I see it that the professional game is faster and faster, looking more and more different to that you see at grassroots level on any given Saturday. So is the pro game and the grassroots game being separated? Is that a problem, or is the grassroots game maybe better playing its own style and its own brand of rugby rather than just trying to replicate everything that people see on TV?
I would say the latter, Tim, and I think who knows, maybe we could even adapt the laws. I think I think we want to reward the evasive skills, and we want to reward skill rather than it being about who's physically superior. I remember towards the end of my sort of playing career, in my early 30s. And I could hardly walk coming off the pitch, because you were playing against guys, even at whatever tier it was, pretty low down. You were playing against guys who were in the gym, training all the time, who were, living the lifestyle almost like professional sports people. And for somebody who's trying to work, 9 till 5 or whatever it might be, it's hard to maintain that sort of level of fitness. So I do think it is a challenge, and I do think that the game should be coached differently and should probably look a little bit different to the one you see at the top level. Yeah, absolutely, I would agree.
What kind of changes, digging into that a bit further, what kind of changes would you like to see in terms of the coaching in particular?
Well, I sort of said that really sort of flippantly. I haven't really thought out any sort of clear, coherent strategy. But I think just an acceptance of certainly when I was a youngster, we weren't all expected to make dominant tackles. When you were tackling, there was an element of self-preservation. It was actually about you not getting hurt, rather than trying to sort of win the collision and dominate the gain line. And it's interesting how rugby is now, people coin that term. It's called a collision sport. Actually, I thought it was about avoiding collisions. I thought, it's the opposite of a collision sport. It's trying to find space. So it's, it's kind of really easy to say, and I'm not really presenting any sort of way forward. But I think the way we think about the game, and we should, and the top. I was actually talking on Twitter earlier with somebody. The professional game rewards territory more than possession, I think, and I wonder whether we should be looking to adapt the laws or the way we coach it or the way we view the game to try and encourage attack and skill and evasion. But I'm not presenting any solutions. I need to think about that a little bit more.
For sure, but the idea is a good one, I think, because I do think that not necessarily sticking close to the pro game is a good thing. I don't think it necessarily is. I think maybe It might help with participation if there was a freer, a more open game at the lower levels. And like you said, I think I'm not averse either to having different laws. I mean, people get confused about the laws of rugby anyway, and that's from top to bottom. So I don't think it would make a massive difference if the laws in the grassroots game were slightly different or slightly amended compared to the pro game.
Yeah, I think Tim, maybe some of your listeners or could hit you up on Twitter or Facebook with some suggestions of maybe some potential law changes that they'd like to see that would make the game more attractive at the grassroots level.
Yeah, I think it could be with this new proposed amended game due to COVID that's hopefully going to be starting again in the new year with a lot less reliance on grunt, I suppose, with there being no scrums and no mauls. I think it'll be a really interesting experiment. I don't know exactly how that's going to play out. I had a couple of lads from Old Colfians on here a couple of weeks ago, and they suggested that without those big contact points of scrum and maul, the game just might look a lot like rugby league, but with 2 extra players on the pitch and just no space. It'll be interesting to see. It might, there might be some surprises there.
Yeah, it's interesting, Tim. I mean, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts. There's that old adage that rugby is a game for all shapes and sizes, and actually, I think we're kind of moving away from that. Actually, I think it's at the top end. It's getting a game for the very sort of genetically gifted. The people who've won the genetic lottery. If you're like me and 5'8" and quite not very athletic, I'm not sure if there's room anymore.
Yeah, I agree that the body shapes are just getting more and more similar at the top level, which it's obvious why the game has gone that way. It's very much fitness based and power based, and it's no surprise really. But I agree, the grassroots game is beautiful because it is a home for literally every single person.
I think, sorry, Tim, just on that, I mean, it'd be really sad, wouldn't it, if you look at sort of American football, and I know American sports kind of have a different history in terms of how they were adopted, but there is no grassroots game in American football, and a lot of that would be surrounding safety issues. I think, they play flag football, don't they? It would be really sad if we got to that stage, because I think, sport and sports clubs are the heartbeat of our communities, and we're moving into a real virtual world now, aren't we? Where we're going to be working from home on Zoom, we're going to be doing our shopping online, and I think now more than ever, there's a real need for community clubs to bring people together.
Yeah, that's a really good point about the American football teams and the sort of player pathways through the college system that they have there. I've been watching a lot of documentaries recently about American football. I just love them. I love the whole process of what they go through. But you're right, it's just a drop off. As soon as they drop out of that system, there's no more American football. That's it. They're done. The sport's dead for them then, effectively. There's no community game, really. And I've thought about this before, and I have concerns that we're going the same way as the professional game gets more and more physical and more out of reach, whether that those players that drop out of that system will end up playing grassroots rugby, or whether they'll just stop playing altogether because they didn't make it. Have you, what are your thoughts on that? Have you seen any evidence that it's going that way?
Yeah, I think it's a real danger, isn't it? That now with sort of the advent of professionalism, lots of young people want to be a professional rugby player, which is great. But as soon as that goal isn't attainable, it's quite hard to readjust why you play the sport. And I think, that's why, fundamentally, I suppose, I would be up for, streamlining talent as high up the pyramid as possible. I think we generally streamline talent way too early. And actually, I think we should embed for as long as possible the sort of amateur ethos and the community game. I don't think representative sport at a young age is particularly helpful for anyone, to be honest. And we know rugby is a late specialization sport. So, I think we should be. I think the community game and the professional game there, I think, there's a bit of a disconnect as well. I think you'd produce as many top players if you kept the base of the pyramid as wide as possible for as long as possible. I don't think there is a need to streamline talent as early as we do.
And what sort of age is that streamlining starting now? And what sort of age would you prefer to see it be at?
I mean, I think we're sort of starting to do it sort of 13, 14, aren't we? And I think, more like the age of 16 would be a better time to start doing that, I think, for me.
Yeah, I mean, it's fair to say that, some players at 16 even, that go on to play elite rugby at 16 years old, you might not even notice that they were, not even making their school first team or anything like that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I just think we could work a little bit more hand in hand. And I mean, there's some great stuff going on with various charities, the RFU, community programs at clubs. But it's interesting whether there are different objectives and whether there could be sort of greater synergy to grow the game.
Yeah. So next question, that's sort of along the lines of that, is you're obviously involved with young people on a daily basis at the school. How do the players view it now? How do the young players coming through? Have you seen a change in attitude from them about what their ambitions are and whether they're aware of what grassroots rugby can give them? And has that changed over the years?
I mean, I think I see the game incredibly popular with kids at school. There are increasing safety concerns, understandably, but I see the great game to me as popular as ever. I mean, but it's really frustrating when that isn't that you spend the time coaching those boys in school for 5 years and then they don't go on to play university rugby, or they don't go on to play the community game, and I think that's really really frustrating. And I just think it seems to me that the game doesn't fit into players' lifestyles like it used to, at the grassroots level. I think, and again, I wonder whether it's that sort of professionalism creeping down into the amateur game. I suspect people with families and who work, it's pretty hard to then go, and go to training twice a week, spend all day on Saturday away from your family. I mean, it's a big ask. And it doesn't seem to fit into people's lives like it once used to.
No, for sure. And I know the RFU, I've heard various people talking about it. They're looking at ways to get games on, not necessarily in the traditional way. So, playing several games on a Friday night or a Sunday afternoon or midweek or something like that, just to make sure that people can play if they want to and be flexible about it as well. Because just having that, I mean, we've already spoken about how long the season is here in the Northern Hemisphere. And I think, even for the amateur, it's a huge, like I say, it's a huge ask. So is there any other thoughts you have about how we could integrate that more so that the young players get that feeling of grassroots rugby and what that can do for them at the same time?
I think, I speak of the sort of environment where I work. I would always encourage people, I think, I would always encourage young people where possible to play club sport. If they're fortunate enough to go to school with a really good, thriving rugby program, I think it's really important they play club sport as well, because if you're not embedded in those clubs while you're at school, it's pretty difficult when you're 18, 19 to go into those environments. I think if you've been in them when you're a youngster from the juniors, if you still have those connections, then I think you're much more likely to maintain them as you get older. I think the step up, to senior rugby, I remember sort of making it myself as an 18-year-old. It's a big jump as an 18-year-old to then go and play with sort of adults. I know, you'd be an adult yourself, but, to play with a sort of gnarly 32-year-old, I mean, that's a big jump up. And I know at university rugby, I think freshers rugby is really thriving. Because people aren't being asked to play with people sort of 3 years older. They can play amongst their peers. So I think some real sort of care and attention needs to be given to that transition from junior youth rugby to senior level.
Yeah, I completely agree. Now, is there anything you think more that the RFU could be doing to really help this? You know, the RFU I think do some really good things during the World Cup. They did the videos where all the players had sort of went back to their junior clubs and they showed all the clubs that the players had come from. Just this weekend and last weekend as well, actually, they had shirts from all community game on the seats at Twickenham. So they do make some kind of effort, but do you think they could do more or something?
I think it's Tim. It's probably one of those things. I mean, you could always probably do more. It's clearly important to them. Um, I mean, that's probably how long is a piece of string. Yes, certainly they could do more. I can't think of any tangible examples of things they could do. But I would like to see. I think I think it's more about a shift in emphasis, isn't it? And those players really supporting their grassroots club. But I think the RFU do a really good job, and I think it's one of those things that they're probably aware of. And I think it's a real disappointing. I think one thing we haven't touched on is when sort of 18-year-old, 19-year-olds get professional contracts, and that transition to being a pro actually during that phase, could they not be playing for their junior clubs? I see a lot of talented youngsters who get Premiership contracts and they end up not playing that much rugby. Would they be better served staying at their junior club and playing in the A-League when possible, but also playing for their junior clubs? I see a lot of talented youngsters who end up sort of 19, 20, 21, not really playing a lot of rugby. And, that's obviously when you should be playing a stack load and learning about the game.
Yeah, I completely agree. Now, when I was finishing up my career towards the end, I managed to, get up the pyramid a little bit myself. So I witnessed some of that. I saw players coming in from places like Quins and Wasps to play at Blackheath and Esher when I was there, and they loved it. B, they grew immeasurably during the time that we had them, and some of them came to us when they were a bit raw. They had to really work to get in the team as much as anything, let alone thrive. But some of them came in and they were superstars, and they very quickly moved on. Now, I don't understand why. I think that still does happen a bit, but nowhere near as much as it used to.
No.
And I don't really fully understand why it doesn't, because I could only ever see positives in it.
Yeah, I think Wyn Jones, the Welsh prop, I think. Could you imagine as a sort of, props are a bit like spinners in cricket. They don't come into their own until they're about 28, 29. And I think, asking a front row forward to step up and play in the Premiership, when he's 19, 20, it'd be a huge ask. But he'd probably learn, dropping down a few levels and playing against a gnarly tight head, he'd probably learn heck of a lot. And there's only so much you learn from, playing against scrummaging against the scrummaging machine or in training. I think you've got to play. And I think actually in recent years, Wales have kind of stolen a bit of a march there. I think some of their younger players have actually played more rugby. There did seem about 10 years ago, there seemed to be a real emphasis on getting players out on loan and them getting experience, but that seems to have shifted away from that.
Yeah, it is such a shame, and you're dead right about the prop situation. I was with when I was at Esher, Joe Marler was there at the same season, and I watched him have a torrid afternoon against Des Brett at Blackheath, who kind of dominated that league for probably over a decade. And he's still, he's referred to it several times as being one of the days where it was kind of a mental shift for him, where he was like, right, I need to step up here because that kind of thing can't carry on, otherwise I'm not going to make it. So I think you're right, but it's not just the physical side, like it's the mental toughness to be able to go through days like that builds resilience in these young players, and then if they've got the ability, then they'll go on and really achieve.
Yeah, and I think probably too much of an emphasis potentially is placed on sort of physical conditioning and not actually those experiences that you learn from playing.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, I think we've solved everything there, Chris. We've ticked everything there, haven't we? I think.
We haven't solved Welsh
Okay,
rugby.
well, that's the unsolvable puzzle. That one, I think, isn't it?
It's looking that way. It's looking that way at the moment.
Okay, so if you've got any final thoughts, I'd love to hear them now. But otherwise, then I'd just like to know what you as a rugby person would like for Christmas, Chris.
Being a fervent Welsh rugby supporter, there's only one thing that we all want, I think, and that's Sean Edwards to come back, please. I just want Sean Edwards to come down my chimney.
Sean Edwards rather than Warren Gatland, or both?
I mean, I would take them. I would take them both, but I think Sean Edwards, that seemed to be the controllable one, and it looks like it's biting us in the backside.
Yeah, sad times. Okay, so yeah, great to talk to you, Chris. And if people want to get hold of you to, dig into some of these subjects even more, what's the best way for people to be able to do that?
Probably hit me up on Twitter. I think I'm Chris Morgan 1980. Hit me up on Twitter. Yeah, be good. It's always good to chat about grassroots rugby, or indeed any sport fundamentally.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. And I'll link that in the show notes for everybody below. So the listeners out there, thank you so much for tuning in. Really good to have you. If you've enjoyed this and got some value out of it, I'd really appreciate you telling your mates next time you're down the club, which, hopefully won't be too long away. But if not, then share it on a WhatsApp group or social media or whatever you can. The Amateur Rugby Podcast is all over social media, on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram. And would love to get some interaction from you. So if you've got some thoughts about this chat we've had here about whether we're losing touch with the grassroots of the game and whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, I'd love to have some of that conversation either here on the comments on Facebook or with myself and Chris on Twitter. It would be great to hear from you. And with that being said, as best as you can, get out and play.